Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you and welcome to another session of the ACA Global Markets with Jim Fitzpatrick. On this platform, we discuss cashew markets and the key factors that affect it. African cashew processors continue to expand their presence in the international markets. So today, we will be discussing an important subject, selling African cashew kernels. We will be joined by experienced African cashew processors who will be sharing their experiences with us, and Jim will be introducing them shortly. This is an interactive session. Be part of the discussion by sharing your comments and questions in the Q&A box. As always, this session is available in both French and English. You can select your preferred language by clicking on the globe icon on the bottom of your screen, and remember to mute the original sound. We are also streaming live on the official ACA Facebook page and our YouTube channel. Feel free to follow us and to share with your network. Remember that this session is brought to you by the African Cashew Alliance ACA with the kind support of the European Union, the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States OACPS, the GIZ MoveCom Cashew Projects, the Cashew Club, and the Sustainable Nuts Initiative. Before I hand you over to Jim, we are just 41 days to the biggest cashew event in Africa, the 2026 ACA Annual Cashew Conference and Expo, which will take place at the La Palm Royal Beach Hotel in Accra, Ghana, from the 15th to the 18th September 2026. The conference will be on the theme Sustainable Cashew Supply Through Policy, Investment, and Partnership. Join hundreds of cashew stakeholders to network, share experiences, and discuss the future of the industry. Online registration is ongoing. Take advantage of the early bird registration period to secure your spot at reduced conference rates. Visit the African Cashew Alliance website to register now. Early bird registration ends on 31st August 2026. Now it's time to go into our discussion. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Isaac. How are you?
Very fine. How are you too?
Well, I'm pretty good. It's
All
midsummer.
right.
It's a pretty quiet time of year in the business.
Yeah.
It's a good
Yeah.
time to reflect on some of the issues. And it's a really good time to think about the future and think about selling African cashew kernels.
Great. We have an interesting topic also, so I hand over to you.
Thanks, Isaac. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be with you again. Thank you for joining the webinar. We got some good guests today. We got some people who know about selling African cashew kernels, and we're going to hear from them a little bit later. Agenda for today, we're going to talk markets and trade as we always do. Then we get on to our main subject. And then toward the end, join us with some questions, some comments. Love to hear them as always. We always get some really interesting feedback. So don't be shy. Get involved. And you can get involved. Raise your hand and you can talk, or you can put something into the chat. Feel free to do so. Always helpful, always welcome. Let's start and talk about markets. Let's talk about what's going on. And as I said, it's a little bit quiet right now. The northern harvest is just about over. It's been interesting. It's much larger than many people would have said going back into February and March. So we had a little bit of a disrupted harvest in West Africa, a little bit late, a little bit unusual circumstances. Disrupted harmattan, I think, was the primary reason many people mentioned. But it has turned out, as the year has gone on, and we're past mid-year now, that this harvest is much bigger than expected. And I'll have a quick look at production in a few minutes. But surprisingly, in that environment, RCN prices have remained very steady. Prices are steady. They do not look like slipping just at the moment. The holders of the material are pretty strong. And of course, we have this impact of higher costs. Higher costs of, well, higher costs of just about everything. Everything from insurance through to freight, supplies, consumables, bags, you name it. Prices seem to have gone up. And that is also supporting not only the price of raw cashew nuts, but also the price of kernels to a certain extent. On the subject of kernels, it seems to me that right now we're looking at relatively steady prices. There's not much reason for change, but there are a few cash flow issues beginning to surface, especially in Vietnam. And cash flow is one of the main drivers when we see markets start to weaken. So we need to look at that. Demand, generally speaking, short-term demand, that is, what are people buying today, this week, last week? It's pretty slow. Most buyers are not active. Now, that's partially seasonal. It's not unusual, for example, for Europeans to be very quiet in the first half of August, Americans too. It's a general trend of trade at this time of year. But at the moment, we do see many buyers hesitant, unsure. They are, generally speaking, well covered for 2026. Do not buy into ideas that there's going to be some kind of seasonal upsurge in kernels prices because Europeans or Americans need cashew kernels for the festivals at the end of the year. They don't, they're covered. It doesn't work that way. Now, you might see a spike in demand elsewhere. You might see a spike in demand from China. You might see a spike in demand in India as they enter, or they're well into actually the festival season. As you know, Indian consumption peaks sometime around October. Most of that is bought, but it might need to be replenished at some point. But we have the disruptors. So we have this war situation in the Gulf, and that is having effects on costs, as I mentioned, but it's also having an effect on buyer confidence and fears of inflation returning. Energy costs really hit, particularly in um, Northern Hemisphere countries, energy costs really hit from September, October onwards. In Europe, we've had so far a very hot summer, impact of climate change, I believe. And that's negative for demand to a certain extent. But once the winter comes, the onset of higher energy costs could stimulate some more inflation that will damage consumer confidence and buyer confidence. So there are certain risks there to demand. And we need to recognize those. They've been there for some months. Demand has slipped a little bit, as I'm going to show you shortly, but there is further threats to the development of demand over the rest of the year. But on a more positive note, the Southern Hemisphere production has started. We will now turn our focus towards the southern producers, Indonesia, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Brazil. Tanzania started well. It looks as if some of those reports that were around, and there were newspaper reports you may have seen that there were problems with input distribution in Tanzania. It it doesn't seem to be absolutely accurate. So it does look right now as if the crop is coming nicely. I'm not saying that it's going to make the target that the cashew board announced of 750,000 tons, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a little bit better than last year's crop. And I wouldn't rule out their forecast either, but it does seem ambitious in the circumstances. So it's August, it's relatively quiet. The festival demand packing distribution is gearing up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there will be more buying. I think that buyers may well wait till September before they make their next moves. We could see some spike in demand early in September. There's often the last week in August, people start to look and you'll see more inquiries, but let's wait and see. Okay, I want to update you on a few factors I want to update you first of all on production. So as I mentioned, we're at the end of the Northern Hemisphere crops, just finishing up now Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, Gambia, and we can probably now have a look at closer estimate of actually what 2026 Northern Hemisphere production was. And in terms of the numbers, it looks pretty good. And a couple of features have emerged over the last few weeks. Cambodia just seems to get bigger and bigger. So if we look at something we can identify as fact, and that is Vietnam's imports from Cambodia, 1.03 million tons imported from Cambodia by Vietnam by the end of June. That is, there is one year that was higher, but I think there was a problem with those numbers back in 2021. So I think this is in reality the record. We've updated estimates from Cote d'Ivoire, probably now heading toward 1.4 million tons, a far cry from the negative estimates of February, around 950,000 tons. And I want to remind everybody that we need to be very careful who we listen to in the cashew business. We need to be very careful how the numbers are presented, where they come from. And, if you go on some of the social media platforms today, you're going to find a lot of AI generated stuff. And what's happening is that the misreports, the errors, the manipulative reports of earlier in the year are now rolling into AI because AI doesn't know any difference. If it's online, it's online. And we're getting a rehash of some of those numbers. So we're getting more and more importance should be placed on the source of your information and thinking about the information and analyzing it from multiple sources. Looking at Tanzania, I'm thinking it's a good crop, as I've mentioned. It's going to grow. It's going to continue to grow. The production in Tanzania, that is. Maybe it won't hit 750,000 tons this year, but it will sometime in the future. And I think as we look at this, we can probably say now that there still is a chance that the 2025-2026 crop, so that would include the crop coming into from Tanzania from last year. And if you put that in at the official estimate, 617,000 tons, you're up here and you would have the largest crop in history. I don't believe it's the largest crop in history. It's probably the second largest crop in history. But going forward, you've really got to be somewhat surprised that governments, and I'm talking about Nigeria targeting 5 million tons, Tanzania targeting 1 million tons, Mozambique 500,000 tons. I've got to ask the question, why are governments continuing to promote production at the expense of promoting consumption, either domestic or export, when production continues to grow faster than consumption? We've got a 7.3% compound annual growth rate in the 10 years up to 2025. It doesn't look like that's going to be broken in 2026 and 2027. We'll see. It depends to a certain extent on El Nino. But you've really got to ask this question. Should we not be focusing on boosting consumption, boosting market organization, boosting value addition, rather than focusing on a headline number of production? That's a question I'll leave for another day, but it is an interesting one to think about. Okay, so production looks much better than we thought, continues to grow. We're not quite sure where it is, but it's up around the 6 million tons, similar to last year. Let's have a look at the supply situation, and we'll start in Vietnam. So if you've been with us before, you'll have seen this table, this diagram. So really what we're saying in this is we're looking at the different elements of the supply. We're looking at Vietnam's imports up to the 15th of July, around 1.82 million tons. That's up by about 5%. You will see numbers knocking around that's saying it's up by 9%. I can't see that. I use the Vietnamese Customs Authority figures. It looks to me as if it's up 5%. If we look at exports and domestic consumption is small and it's an estimate. So this is really about exports. Exports are slightly down on last year, not by much, but slightly down, and that could easily change. And that is a remarkable performance, given that 2025 was such a bumper year and that 2026 has been disrupted by so many different factors. The fact that Vietnamese processors have still maintained this kind of level of export is quite remarkable. We look at the crop, we look at the opening stock, haven't changed anything there. Burma imports continue to be quite strong, mainly from Africa. Don't forget, Vietnam is Africa's biggest customer for cashew kernels as well as raw cashew nuts. And I've updated the afloat product. Now, that might be a little bit on the low side, the 200,000 tons. But if we add it up, it looks like there's about 3.5 months supply of raw cashew nuts available to Vietnamese processors. And that's about right for the time of year. You know, you might have seen an article come out this week about a trade deficit in Vietnam. Well, of course, there's a trade deficit in August because the stocks of raw cashew nuts are high. We won't see that change till the end of the year when those stocks are sold, if they're sold, but indications on exports are that they will be sold. So when we look at this, there's a couple of factors that are coming very clear. When we look at the four major African suppliers to Vietnam, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria, and Tanzania, and we see different factors at play. So you can see that Ivorian imports for Vietnam are up by the end of June. Not significantly up, but up, but not as high as they were back in 2024. Ghanaian are down, significantly down, and that reflects later shipments, later crop, later availability from Burkina. So bear in mind that product flowing through Ghana is often identified as Ghanaian, even though it comes from other countries. And so later availability from those countries means that imports into Vietnam are lower from Ghana. That I think will correct itself as the year goes on. Nigeria, pretty healthy. Again, a later start. And what we're seeing here is that because of the major imports from Cambodia, I think that buyers from Vietnam are coming to market a little bit later. So they're coming to the West Africa market a little bit later, and that's exposing the problem of infrastructure and the problem of managing farm gate prices, because the buyers who used to be there on the dot of the 1st of March are now not seen until well into April. And that's also handing greater control to major international trading companies who dominate the sector, as you know, and who now have a much greater role to play in finance, in assembly of raw material. They're strong holders and they're able to hold the price of raw nuts relatively steady. And that's really what we're seeing this year. The other factor, of course, is the increase in production in Tanzania means that you get more and more product imported into Vietnam from Tanzania. And you can see that it's really expanded over the last 3 years. And we would expect that number to be even higher in 2027. So from 71 to 159,000 tons. In the future, it would not be surprising if that was double. If the Cashew Board of Tanzania's predictions on the crop are accurate. So big factors, big impact of increased production in Cambodia, big increased production in Tanzania. These are impacting the raw cashew nut market, obviously, and they're changing the dynamics of buying in West Africa. So you've the two factors at play. You've buyers are coming later to West Africa, and you've got processing windows in place, which are supportive of value addition, but which are slightly disruptive from a farm gate point of view. So those countries that have minimum farm gate prices are going to find it more difficult to defend those prices in the future as production grows, and particularly as the balance between East Africa, Cambodia, and West Africa starts to shift again. And it does look as if Cambodian production will continue to grow. And that's surprising. So numbers, 1.5 million tons in the future should not be ruled out. Cambodian farmers are getting good prices. They're growing high-yielding varieties, and that's going to have an impact on the RCN market. There's another aspect to that, just to mention it briefly, that in Cambodia, they're mainly growing large cashew nuts. The new varieties, particularly M23 variety, is large, sizes up as high as 120, 130. This is quite common. And so they're not making as many WW320s as might have been expected. Now, that's an interesting one because it's an opportunity for African processors who will have larger supplies of WW320s. But for buyers in most markets, they have become adjusted and their product mix is adjusted to using WW320s. We've just seen, if we take production at 1 million tons, roughly, if we say 80% of that is M23, that would mean 80% of that 1 million tons from Cambodia, about 800,000 tons, is not going to produce high yields of 320s. Could that see a change in the way we manage snacks? Or could it see a collapse eventually in the premiums for large nuts? Those are questions to be answered another day. Let's have a look at demand. So we're going to look at the exports from Vietnam. It's a really good indicator. The figures are available quickly, and Vietnam has about a 74%, I think, share of the world market. So if we look at this, January, February, March through to June, the green bars are the exports cumulative month by month, up to 341,000 tons by the end of June, compared to 348 in 2023 and 344,000 tons last year. So a remarkable performance still, as I mentioned. But what we have seen is a very strong start. So early in the year, exports were well ahead of last year, 50 versus 37, 75,000 tons versus 66,000 tons. And that increase has slipped away as the year has gone on. And it's quite interesting to look at that. And you've got to, first of all, recognize that there is an impact of the war in the Middle East impacting on shipments, particularly to the Gulf countries, but also to other regional countries. And that's been partially offset by something of a return of North America. So let's have a look at the destination of shipments. So we're still looking at export shipments from Vietnam, and we're looking at them for the various countries over the past 4 years, 2023 to 2026, for the first half of the year. China, North America, the US, and Canada together, the top 10 European destinations, the Middle East, top six, and then East and Central Asia, excluding China. So we look at China first of all, and what we see is a slight drop in shipments, about 2.25% down. I don't think there's any significance in that at all. I think it's really remarkable that the Chinese market has held the gains of last year. Shipments are very similar to the same period last year and well ahead of 2023 or 2024. So the gains have been held in China. In North America, Canada and the US combined, we see an increase in export shipments of just over 12%. So we're seeing something of a bounce back. Shipments at 85,000 tons for the first half, significantly ahead of last year, but not yet heading back towards the 2024 figure, which was a record figure. Now, probably 2024 was a slightly overstated figure in so much as that people were building inventories against the introduction or potential introduction at that time of tariffs. But even if we compare back to 2023, we see we're ahead of that. So I would say that we have seen a significant bounce back in the US market. Ideas that demand for cashews was on a downturn, that pistachios had taken over, for example. This seems to be not correct based on the figures this year. But we should also note that there's been a little bit of a slowdown in shipments over the May-June period, and that may be an indicator of a more troublesome second half of the year. Coming to Europe, so we're talking about the top 10 countries in Europe. Most of European imports are in the top four. About 75% is in the top four countries. Again, we see a little bit of a slippage on shipments from Vietnam. It's about 4.5% down. Nothing particularly significant in that. Shipments from Africa are up, and that's impacting shipments from Vietnam. Europeans seem to be more engaged with the African suppliers than their competitors in North America or China or anywhere else virtually. And that is, so I would say it's steady enough progress. I think the 4% down from Vietnam is made up partly by an improvement in shipments from Africa. But I would be a little bit concerned about European demand over the summer months, the level of inventory that remains with roasters, and the fact that there may be some economic concerns in the second half of the year. If not statistically, then probably in consumer confidence. So we may be looking at signs of a little fall away. And I want to remind you of 2022, not a very pleasant memory, unfortunately. Second half of 2022, we saw big fall off in demand in Europe, and that was because of higher energy prices and inflation. That was following the Russian attack on Ukraine. Now, we're not seeing the same impact on oil or gas prices as we saw then, but it's a possibility. So watch what happens in the famous Straits of Hormuz. Keep an eye on what's happening in the war generally and the negotiations on that war for clues as to how European demand might fare in the second half of the year. Now, it's also interesting just to note on this point that when the war started, it had a much bigger effect on demand in India than it had in Europe. And that's for various reasons. It's mainly because it's oil rather than gas. At the time of 2022, it was supplies of gas to Europe from Russia that caused the big spike in prices. We're not going to get as big an impact, but it may well have an impact on demand in India in the second half of the year. There are other factors at play there too, the weakness of the Indian rupee, for example. So kind of neutral outlook, I think, on demand in Europe for the second half, not expecting any upsurge, but long-term underlying trends do remain strong in Europe. Okay, so Middle East, again, we're looking at a big downturn early in the year due to the war, due to the blockage and the impact of war. We cannot judge how demand overall has performed. We know that it's disrupted by the war. We did see something of a return in May, but back a little bit down in June. So it's going to be like that for the rest of the year. There will not be a recovery in the sense that once you miss certain types of seasonal demand, for example, during Ramadan, it's gone. It doesn't come back. So you don't get a balancing effect later in the year because if people consume fewer cashews in February and March doesn't mean they'll consume more in September, October. If you have people telling you that, don't believe it. And in Asia, generally, so we're looking at Central Asia, we're looking at Japan, Korea, countries like that. Also included in this group is Australia, which is a significant consumer, and we're seeing strong growth, 9.8% growth, following a little bit of a slip last year, but we're back now and we're up around the same levels that we were 2024 when prices were low. So generally speaking, looking at this situation, it's relatively steady. Demand underlying remains quite strong, but it is somewhat volatile. Now, last year we saw huge growth in China offsetting a decline in the United States. That was down to import tariffs. This year we're seeing a much more mixed picture. We're seeing a little bit slower shipments to Europe, a little bit slower shipments to China, but a return to form for the US market. Will that continue? Who knows? To be honest, this is such a volatile situation. Demand is not volatile, it's growing positively. Prices are relatively stable, but the whole economic and political environment is so volatile that it is quite difficult to know the next steps. Let's have a look at prices. So we have a quick look at prices for raw cashew nuts, and we have seen relatively stable prices Since we saw that big correction back in 2024, we have seen relatively stable prices. So April, May 2024 prices way up. And this wasn't a fundamental issue. It was stimulated by a unexpected short-term ban on exports from Cote d'Ivoire, but it was long overdue. Prices needed a correction. So we're looking at prices today above the 5-year average. We're looking at prices that are barely manageable for processors. We're looking at a situation where we have, let me go back to one slide. We're looking at a situation where we are higher than the 5-year average. We are barely manageable in terms of processors' margins. So there are tighter margins for processors. And don't forget this year that prices are a little bit higher because average quality is a little bit lower, particularly Cote d'Ivoire, but also other West African countries. So the red line is an index, and the index tries to bring all of the available origins at any particular moment in time to a 48 pounds average. It looks as if those prices will remain steady through the year. There's no real indicator at the moment of weakness in raw cashew nut prices. Looking at kernels, what we're seeing is a situation where prices are relatively stable, again, similar to raw cashew nuts following that big increase in 2024. We are well above the 5-year average. We're just below the 2-year average. We're below the highs of the period, but I would ignore the highs because there was a spike if you go back to 2024 that really made no sense at the time. It was a little bit of speculation. So price is relatively well positioned. These kernels prices should work for most buyers. I think prices remain stable. As I said, everything else is volatile, but prices are relatively stable. We've talked about the compensating factors. Interestingly, African cashew kernels have continued to maintain their premium. So we do see higher prices from well-positioned processors in Tanzania, in Cote d'Ivoire, and elsewhere based on quality, based on costs, and costs are a big factor. So we see now, for example, freight costs in Vietnam at, I think it's about $3,000 for a container, 20-foot container to Western Europe. That's way above where it might have been 3, 4 years ago. So this is a key factor, and it is also supporting prices. But when costs go up like that, nobody's getting any advantage from it. So I think right now, for the rest of the year, buyers are going to be relatively reluctant. There's no real, at least looking at the numbers and the prices, there's no real reason to chase this market from a kernels buyer's point of view. Cover is good. Availability is good. There is a little bit of cash flow pressure, perhaps. Certainly, if I were a buyer, I'd be watching, waiting, rather than chasing this. And certainly, I'll be doing that in the month of August, and that's what I would expect to see. So, trends and outlook on supply. I think the current inventories of raw cashew nuts and probably kernels are adequate, that there is likely to be a carry out of RCN, good crop in Tanzania. We're not going to see an impact of El Nino in Tanzania this year. Impact of El Nino would be next year. There is more processing likely in Africa this year, especially in Cote d'Ivoire, but we are seeing a good sized crop, but a certain impact on the availability of kernels due to lower outturns. That's about lower quality. On the demand side, I think buyers of kernels are well covered. We're still looking at rising costs. We have a weaker Indian rupee, which affects the buying power of Indian processors and consumers. Demand continues to grow steadily in the long term, but nowhere near as fast as production is growing. And that's probably the key strategic concern in the cashew business right now. There may be when we look at prices, there may be reason for Vietnamese processors to push. If you look at the offers coming from Vietnam in the last couple of weeks, there are a lot of nearby offers. So processors are not so confident to sell forward, but they need to sell nearby. That could be indicative of some kind of cash flow squeeze. The standoff between kernels and RCN continues. The still hasn't been a day where you could buy RCN and turn it into kernels, and even on a calculation, and make an adequate profit margin. I think that even with lower prices, if that were to happen, I don't think that would change buyer behavior. I think they would be more likely to wait if prices started to slip. And for that reason, I think processors will probably stay roughly where they are. What could disrupt this pattern? Well, going into next year, El Nino could disrupt this pattern. I think the most likely impact of El Nino, as we discussed during the last event 2 weeks ago, is in Southeast Asia, particularly Cambodia, but also to a certain extent in Indonesia, although Indonesia is a much smaller producer. Less likely to have a major impact in West Africa. But what could have an impact in West Africa is policy changes. Policy changes may be coming in Nigeria, may be coming in Ghana, um, to a lesser extent in Cote d'Ivoire, and those can have an impact. And those can certainly have an impact, both short term and long term. So keep an eye on those. By the way, in 2 weeks on the 19th, we're going to talk about some of the lessons from the 2026 season, including lessons on policy and policy development. Other disruptors could be an economic downturn in China that would affect cashew demand. That's quite a possibility. And of course, there's always the prospect that US tariffs might change. So we have this situation where tariffs were reintroduced under a different um, guise, some would say pretense, the Section 301. But it does appear, and it's by no means clear, but it does appear that cashews remain exempt from tariffs following the ruling going back to, was it last September, when a certain group of raw materials that weren't produced in the United States were excluded from tariffs. And that appears to be still the case, despite the reintroduction of the Section 301 tariffs in July. It's not a particularly volatile situation, but there are enough ingredients there to make you think that it could become volatile. That's more likely to happen as the year goes on. It's more likely to happen toward the end of the year. And it'll be interesting to see the relationship between raw cashew nut prices and kernels as the year progresses and the new crops approach. Always interesting in cashews. This August, it's no exception. That's the market. That's the trends and outlook as I'm seeing them right now. Let's move on to our main subject for the day, which is selling African cashew kernels, one of the most neglected aspects of the sector. People talk about and develop production, processing, you name it, but they very rarely address this issue of selling cashew kernels. Now, it's not as bad as it was, but it has certainly improved. And we've got some really interesting guests, and these people know what selling African cashews means. We have James Mulhall, the Managing Director of Coastal Nuts Tanzania. I think Coastal's been operating 5 years now successfully, marketing in several markets. Some of the best quality cashews that I've ever seen are coming from there. A BRC certified facility based in Mtwara. We'll talk to James about his view on selling African cashew kernels shortly. We're also joined by Philippe Crew. Philippe is the sales director at Cashew Coast, the very well-known processor in Cote d'Ivoire. Cashew Coast is a business that markets certified and sometimes highly certified cashew kernels, including organic certified, fair trade organic, Naturland. This company is way ahead when it comes to developing supply chains and again produces an excellent product, both bulk and consumer packs with various projects in hand. I would say one of the leaders in the vanguard of African cashew processing. And our third guest is Daniel Gamana, founder and CEO of Vertex Agro Nigeria. So Vertex is a really interesting company. It's a business that has a range of interests in the food business and elsewhere, produces a good product, and is amongst the leaders of the Nigerian cashew sector. So three really interesting guests. Before we come to them, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on the market, kind of to remind ourselves of how this market works, where most of the sales are made, and some of the problems that have been experienced. So quickly, let's go through some of these factors. This is to give some context to the conversation with our guests to follow. First of all, remind ourselves of a couple of things. North America, Europe, China are the major importers of cashew kernels. The Middle East would be number 4 in that group. India is the largest consumer, but India buys its cashews in raw cashew nut form. It grows about 40% of its needs, imports the rest, mainly from African countries. But Vietnam dominates processing, and Vietnam dominates the cashew world today. 89% share of North America, 74% share of Europe, over 90% share of China. And the other major factor, as India has disappeared from the international trade in kernels, or virtually disappeared from it, is that the rise of Africa, especially Cote d'Ivoire, but not only Cote d'Ivoire, also countries like Benin, Nigeria, Tanzania, have all made progress. So today, African countries have about a 21% share of the European market and about a 7% share of the US market. This is moving, and it's been moving quite rapidly. So when we talk about selling cashew kernels, we're talking from a West African point of view, mainly to Europe, but also to North America. From an East African point of view, certainly to Europe, but also the Middle East can be a key market, as can the markets of Asia. Key problem is competing with the strength of Vietnamese processors. Let's have a look at what drives demand across the market. So if we look in those key markets that African cashew kernels are supplied to, in Europe, about 21% of world consumption, it's convenience, it's healthy snacking, it's healthy eating. Now we talk about all these factors, but let's remind ourselves, one of the key things about cashews is taste, texture, quality. No matter how sustainable, no matter how convenient, no matter how important the trends in the market are, it's about quality, taste of the product. These are the most important factors. If we don't make a decent product, we don't sell it at the end of the day. But it's also true to say that the trends in Europe are driving fast-growing consumption there. In the United States, a little bit similar, but not quite. The United States is much more responsive to trends in their own domestic economy and much more responsive to price trends in the individual nuts, whether cashews are up or down, but also whether pistachios and almonds prices move up and down. If we look in West Asia and North Africa region, sometimes known as the Middle East, there is a long-term tradition of snacking. Two factors, price and general economic conditions, and obviously politics today. These are also factors. So throughout all of those three markets, quality, price, the driving factors, but also factors around about the impact of the trade, conscience-driven consumption, what's sometimes known as sustainability, although I don't think that's a great word as a umbrella for these trends, are factors. If we look at China, relatively new market. So as we've seen, Chinese demand has doubled in the last 4 years, and we're seeing similar factors. We sometimes forget that in China, food safety is becoming more and more a factor. And we have seen some recent changes in the food safety regulations in China to make it more difficult to sell nuts there. So we can no longer say that the European market is the only market that demands high levels of food safety. It's also the case in North America. It's also the case in China. That's been coming for a long time. These are the drivers in the key target markets. India is not that much different. It's maybe more vulnerable to economic downturn. Demand growth is more vulnerable to economic downturn, but the overall trend in India has been strong for many years. But as I mentioned, it's not a market for kernels, so we won't dwell too much on the Indian market today. Okay, let's look now at Africa. Let's look at processing in African countries. And what you've got is a chart that shows three things. The overall trend in tons of raw cashew nuts processed in African countries, about 773,000 tons in 2025. Côte d'Ivoire, which is by far the leader, 2 of every 3 cashews processed in Africa are processed in Côte d'Ivoire. It's about 71% last year, 62%, averaging around 65% in recent years. And if we look at the rest of Africa, again, a positive trend, but less obviously positive. So we saw a peak in 19, a decline in 20, and it's been gradually building. But the growth is a little bit slower. And despite market share growth overall in African countries, in Europe, we're not seeing the same progress. We're not seeing the same rate of growth across all countries as we're seeing in Côte d'Ivoire. And there are several reasons for that, which we will go into, I think, the next time we talk in 2 weeks. One of the reasons is the utilization of capacity. And this is one of the problems. Now, utilization of capacity affects the profitability, affects the economics of processing, obviously. It's also a factor of the youth of the industry. It takes time to build a cashew factory into a fully operational unit, probably 3 to 5 years, certainly 3 as a minimum. And that's a factor in Nigeria. It's a factor in Côte d'Ivoire. It's a factor to a certain extent in Benin. It's less of a factor in Mozambique. It's less of a factor in Ghana. It's less of a factor in Tanzania, but we are still seeing underutilization of existing capacity. And there's many reasons for that, which I'll talk about. But this is not easy. This is a difficult process. 10 African countries. In a year of record exports to Europe, 10 African countries' exports to the EU actually fell in 2025. Vietnam remains the most important market. So that's for partial processing. It's not for full value addition. It's for what we call the Burma kernels, the unpeeled cashew kernels. So it is about 55, 60% of the process, but it's also the least labor intensive part of the process. And it's also the part of the process that leaves behind the issue or the problem, or perhaps the opportunity of the byproducts. So we see a difficult process moving positively, but highly concentrated. That's what's happening in African countries. And that's a key challenge in selling African cashew kernels. Big issues for processors: underutilization of capacity, management of processing plants, marketing, our key subject for today. Enough working capital. This is impacting the utilization of capacity. Good supply chain linkages. It is amazing. It remains amazing to me that so many cashew factories still do not have direct linkages to farmers or cooperatives or in any way to the smallholders that grow the cashews. They tend to buy from traders. And that is a big challenge. There's a cost aspect, but the cost aspect is the least problem. There are also problems related to the traceability, quality, and management of the process. And if we get a year of a poor crop, or if we get a year of challenging growing conditions, I think that some of those issues will come home to some of the processors who don't have the supply chain linkages. And the final one is government policy. And I'm saying this, I'm calling it surviving government policy because on the one hand, you can see that government policy can be beneficial, but on the other hand, you can see that it's really difficult to negotiate your way through government policy as a processor. That again is a subject for another day. Other factors, cost competitiveness. So competitiveness for African processors is based on lower supply chain costs compared to higher processing costs. That I think is a general statement right across the sector, and I think it is probably still true. So it's much dearer to get Ivorian cashew nuts to Vietnam and process them than it is to get them to a processing plant in Cote d'Ivoire, for sure. But it's more expensive to process because Vietnam has scale, Vietnam has cheaper inputs like electricity, and the two things tending to balance. And what we're finding is that they are more and more balancing each other. Location, well, African cashew processors have huge advantage in location. When we look at these two key markets I mentioned, North America, Europe, shorter lead times, lower freight costs, and that's becoming a bigger factor. And that means that you can manage as a buyer with less inventory, that the kernels that you might ship would have a longer shelf life and fresher kernels. And it's kind of interesting. I was chatting to someone in Germany last week, and I was saying that many people in Europe have never tasted fresh, high quality cashew kernels. The product they get is sometimes 6, 8, 10, or even more months old because it does that huge journey to Vietnam where it's processed and then sent back. So this is a competitive advantage. We have the advantage of, it's a kind of trendy thing to talk about in some ways, but it is a fact. The idea of a sustainable supply chain, and there is a huge opportunity in this, managing smallholder production, managing the impact of climate change, creating a traceable product. But there are other aspects to it, and this is, in some ways why I think that the label sustainable is just not adequate. What we have in Africa is an alternative. We have an opportunity to reduce supply chain risk. We have the opportunity to reduce the environmental and social impact of the cashew business and to have a much more positive impact on smallholders, the people that grow this product. And there is an opportunity there for investors. So I think when we come to marketing and selling African cashews, this is a key factor. How we present it is tricky. And we're going to hear from our guests in a few moments as to how they do that. Key trends in consumption. Let's remind ourselves, traceability, responsible sourcing with new laws covering that being introduced, particularly in Europe, but not only in Europe. Food safety and particularly concern on the use of pesticides and chemical fertilizers. Marketing, being able to tell your story. So if you are an African cashew processor, you may well have a really interesting story to tell about your linkage to farmers, how you work with those farmers, how they work with you, how this changes their lives or improves their lives, how the workers in your factory manage this type of work, which they may not have previously experienced. Great opportunity and a really important trend. We also see increasing consumption in those developing economies, countries like China, India. This is really important and a major factor. And to a certain extent, we are seeing a shift in demand from the West, from Europe and North America as dominant demand markets to the East, increasing consumption in Asian countries, obviously China being the highlight of that at the moment. And we're also seeing a diversification of applications. So we're seeing more things like nut butter, flavored cashew nuts that are in some way part of a mix or part of an ingredient, a snack bar, for example. This is a major factor in changing demand, and it changes buyers' requirements too. We have to talk about quality. We have to talk about food safety certification and how that opens doors for processors. The basic food safety, the advanced food safety, and then compliance with the CSR or ESG or whatever the label you're putting on it today, and how that's expressed. Basically, we're talking about looking after the human rights of people who grow, process, and are engaged in the cashew nut sector. What's made processors successful? Having the right scale, selecting the right equipment, making a quality product, managing their process well. This is a key factor and has sometimes been missing. And the right kind of quality management systems and certification of those systems. These are the key factors. If we look on the other side, on the supply chain and marketing, linking to suppliers, linking to the farmers or their cooperatives, selecting the right customers, being in the right location. And we've spoken about the advantage for African processors. For me, as someone who advises processing companies, one of the most important factors is to take a long-term approach. Cashew processors will not start to make profits quickly, but they will make profits if they manage their business well. And what's also interesting in success is that certain businesses have created a defined brand or a niche for themselves. And we'll have a quick look, an African model. First of all, African cashews is a story, not a commodity. Supply is plentiful, using Vietnamese technology and scale, covering higher costs by supply chain savings, focusing on near and relevant markets, matching buyers' needs, and not trying to compete on price. So those are some of the factors that I see. Now let's see what's the experience of our guests. And we'll start with James Mulhall of Coastal Nuts. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Jim. How are you?
I'm
Thanks for
great.
having me on.
Yeah, it's great to see you.
You
How's
too.
business? What do you think? What do you think are the
Business.
three most important factors for success in selling African cashew kernels?
It's a good question. Okay, well, a lot of what you've said in your last couple of slides are the core of what it is. You need to have scale, you need to have the equipment to do the scale, and you need to have the management in place. You need to have your links to the supply chain, and that is the core of what you're trying to do. For us, and then for us in East Africa, the key thing for us is that we have quality. Okay, so then we have to match that quality with our customer. So there's no point talking with a customer who doesn't have a premium market, who has a very tight market, very price sensitive market, because our RCN costs are higher than most of West Africa. And as a result, and we have the premium to match it, so we need to match the customer. So that's the core thing, is to try. There's lots of elements of how you match, but the key thing is to have a matching customer, so you have a longer term relationship with the customer rather than just a trading price sensitive relationship. So it's the mix, really, and you need your certification in place. It's a must, and your SEDEX or SMETA needs to be in place. That's a must if you have the quality, because if you're selling into quality markets, they require these things. Even if you're selling into markets that don't require them, they want them because they want that standard, because they want the quality, because you're selling quality. And it's not because Coastal Nuts is such a great factory at processing. If you don't get quality, you can't sell quality. Yeah, you can have a factory that decreases the quality, but you can't improve it. So the farmers and the producers of raw cashew nuts in Tanzania is second to none. Even their drying capability is excellent, but that comes at a price. It's an extra cost for RCN, but you have the quality, and it's about matching. So it's all about matching. You have your quality, your certification, and you have to manage your customer. Matching also includes a good customer, a customer that maybe wants a mix of cashews, a customer that will pay when they say they will pay and how they pay. It doesn't have to be the best terms, it just has to be consistent. So as you can then plan your cash flow. And I suppose the third main thing would be that we're single origin, as all of the African countries are. So we trying to get into good contracts with our customers is one of the key things. And that's only by trial and error on both sides, because the customer needs to build a relationship with you as much as you are trying to build a relationship with the customer. So that would be my opening response. I can't hear you now, Jim.
That's because I'm listening to you so much, I forgot to unmute myself. I'm interested in the, matching customers. I absolutely get the point, and it's really well made point about finding the right customer. So how do you do that? Do you try and convince the customer to shift to, let's say, a premium, higher quality, or do you look for customers that are already in that position and try and engage with them? How does that work? It sounds like quite a difficult process.
It is. It takes time. There's no doubt about that. Any of the relationships, because if they're if they want, if they have a premium market, they'll want to do plenty of investigation into who you are and what you are. So they'll want to come and visit your factory. Now, that's not a huge thing, but they'll all want to come and visit your factory. There's no way of doing it without doing that. So that will be a trip. So you have to engage somebody at a trade show, you meet them at a trade show, you talk to them. And the first thing I do with any of my customers is I send them samples of my product. So send them samples, and then they know what you have, and then you can discuss. Because if it's a really nice product, but they don't have the market for it, then it's the lovely product that we can't sell to you. But if it is a product that they like and they have a premium market, then you can say, okay, this is what we can supply. Number two is the shift. If the customer is looking for the shift to move from what quality they have to a higher grade quality, that again is a process and a story, because you have to work with them slowly as they go through that shift, and that's fine too. And then and that's it. You're trying to build your core customers of premium quality customers. And then all of our cashews are not premium. They're all high quality, but you'll have your lower grades, and you'll have your standard grades, etc., of each product. And you can sell that to, we'll say, a regular market that doesn't require a premium. But if you have
there's a whole mix of skills, there's a whole different types of relationships in there. But the basic umbrella is that you're selling a premium product to a demanding customer.
Yes.
Is that a fair reflection?
Yeah, that'd be a fair reflection, yeah.
Stay with us, James. We're going to come back to you, but I want to move to Philippe Crew. Good morning, Philippe. How are you?
Hi, Jim. Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks.
What's your thoughts on this question? What are the three most important factors for success in selling African cashew kernels?
Very good questions. In my view, the three most important factors for success in selling African cashews are, firstly, I would say certification and compliance. So international buyers require certification like BRC, organic, Fairtrade, Naturland, and BioSwiss. So this certification builds trust and provide access to premium markets. And secondly, I would say communication and reliability. Having a strong export and sales department is critical and essential. So customers need quick communications, transparency, and above all, reliability. We must keep our promises regarding quality, volumes, and delivery schedules. And regarding the third one, I would say traceability and connection to farmers. building a direct relationship with farmers allow us to keep the traceability in our supply chain, so which is very important for our clients. And if I may have a fourth element, I would say African identity. So being local, Ivorian, and West Africa give us a unique understanding of the origin, the farmers, and the reality of the cashew sector. So this authenticity creates value for our customers and our partners.
There's two big words stand out in what you're saying for me. One is reliability, and two is authenticity.
Mhm.
These it clearly shows a kind of a mature marketing approach from Cashew Coast. In Cashew Coast is primarily active in certified chains, I think. Is that right? Organic, Nature Land, Fair Trade. Is that accurate?
Yes, yes, exactly. You see, this is one thing that we understood during the last 5 or 6 years. Our clients are looking for certification, and to get access to the premium market, you should be certified. For example, in Germany, Natural is something very important. Of course, BRC certification is the key point, but having Natural for German market give you a better chance to market your products. And it's more or less the same thing for for other clients and other countries. So that's why we invest a lot in the certifications.
And this gives market access. But I think certification doesn't just sell the cashews. There needs to be more than that. When you talk to a new customer, what would be your key? If I was talking to a new customer and I wanted to understand how to communicate with them, what would be what would be the main factors that you would highlight as to how I should communicate with the customer? I think we're not hearing you, Philippe.
You see,
Yeah.
what I understood from my clients is, for most of my clients, is they are. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Okay, okay, perfect. So I'm saying that what I understood from my client is they are looking for they would like to see our whole supply chains. And another point uh, is the traceability. So we are trying to show them benefits of cashews. Behind, uh, white kernel to have the farmers. They are going to eat raw cashew nuts. So for us, the traceability from the farmers to the factory first is really important. So that's why at the moment Cashew Coast is buying farm gate. So
Interesting.
we are
Okay.
that for the farmers, we have a relations with the and when our time to came in to spend with them and to show them what happens in the bush, what is the big challenges from the farmer side. So this is really, really, really important for our clients.
And this supports your point about the African identity, that it's a
Exactly,
whole supply chain identity.
exactly.
So what I hear from you is that you listen to your customers, that this is an important factor. I think maybe we lost Philippe. Philippe, it's not a great connection. We're not hearing you very well right now.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, that's better. We can hear you again.
Okay. Okay.
I was saying that what I hear from you is that you listen to your clients, first of all, that the full supply chain approach supports the African identity, which you mentioned. And I was asking you about we're talking about communication. I was saying, what are the key factors? And what I get from you is listening to your customer first is a key factor, rather than just telling them, listening to them. But what if I were to, if I was working for you and I was starting to make some sales calls, what would be the key communication factors that you would highlight for me?
Uh, I think the key point. You see, as we are in the sales and export department, as we are in the end of the process, it's very important for our client to see that the team, the export team and the sales team are very professional. So keeping a good relation, be in touch with the client during the whole shipping process is very important. Give them all information about the shipment, the goods is something very important, and the reliability. I would say the reliability. We should keep our promise. If you say to your client that the product will be sent during the month of August or September, you should do your best to ship the product in August or September. In case of any issues, you must inform your client. You must inform the client to help him to to adapt his own process. So be in touch with them and having a very strong export teams is one of the key points for me. So we need to
Yeah,
show to the client that we are very professional.
I think that the word that you've used, professionalism and showing professionalism, is a really key factor. And certainly, as I used to buy a lot of cashews, it's going back a few years now, but I wish would have had someone who would regularly update me on shipments, would be reliable on shipments, and would be in contact. This, I think, this managing the relationship is really what we're talking about, and I think you make very well made points on this. So I'm going to just to summarize what you're saying. I think certification and more importantly compliance, that what I hear from you is that certification isn't just a piece of paper. It's the word compliance is important.
Yeah.
Good communication and professionalism, essential factors, and being reliable as part of that. Traceability and identity. And I think these are really interesting factors. And in a way, it reflects some of the things that James Mulhall was saying to us a few minutes ago, around about finding the right customers, managing the customer relationships. What we're seeing here is two people who are very experienced in selling African cashews and focus highly on relationships, but also on compliance with customers' requirements. But as James said, and very rightly, I think as well, it comes through with what Philippe's been saying too, is that the customer must have a certain function also for the business, so that not all cashews are, Naturland certified or WW180s. You've all kinds of grades to sell and you've all kinds of certifications. Philippe, that's really interesting. We're going to come back to you, so stay with us. But I'd like to move now to Nigeria and Daniel Gamana, the founder and CEO of Vertex Agro. Good morning, Daniel.
Good morning, Mr. Jim.
How are you, sir?
I'm good. And you?
Yeah, I'm well. I realize when I see you now that we have met. I wasn't sure
Yeah,
if we had met, but now I see you and I remember you very well.
a couple of times.
Thank you very much for joining us. What's your take on this question? What do you think are the most important factors for success in selling African cashew kernels?
Yeah, once again, thank you. And thanks for everybody. Yeah, just like my colleagues have mentioned the issue of certification and compliance. The one important thing in Africa is that the European market, both the European market and the American markets, they are aware that African cashew is just coming up. And a lot of the buyers are interested in being stakeholders in the African cashew market and the business. I mean, so one important thing they're looking for is people who are transparent, companies, factories that are transparent. So transparency is very, very key to get a customer that is able to hold on to you for a very long time, and a customer that is ready to stake in your business, a customer that is ready to, not just buy from you, but to make sure that you are projected both in Europe and in America. So, certifications, important compliance, but transparency is very key. Now, just like you said in your presentations, a lot of laws are coming up in the US and the UK in EU on ESG. So the African processors stand a better chance in that we have a direct linkage to our farmers, direct linkage to the fields. Traceability is so easy, and these are key selling points in most of the superior supermarkets. This gives us premium price. So if you're able to project your factory or company, your product as a product that is compliant with the ESG requirements, that gives you a premium price and that gives you a lot of advantage over your counterparts in other countries. These issues are becoming more and more important every day. And so we cannot compare, Africa cannot compete India and Vietnam on the cost of production. We have to look for other ways of making our products a premium product instead of being a commodity. And one of them is just the story behind our products. So for us, we have very beautiful stories backed up with pictures and photos. And these give a lot of access to some premium markets in both Europe and in the US. I think these are the things we do in addition to what our colleagues have enumerated. Thank you.
Yeah, Daniel, it's really interesting what you're saying. I particularly like the way you're talking about the buyers want to become stakeholders in the sector. I think that's a really key thing. And it's something that's fairly common in other value chains, but can only be possible in cashews for origin processed cashews, which today is African cashews. Also, I love your point about the story and the storytelling. This is so in line with modern marketing trends, and it fits very well. So I think what we're seeing here is from our three speakers is that we're seeing not only do you have to be in line with the technical requirements, Daniel, Philippe, and James have all mentioned about certification and compliance, but also to have a marketing approach and a marketing story that I suppose, gives life to your ability to be competitive. And I think Daniel's point about not competing simply on price, because that's just not going to work, at least it's not going to work for now, maybe in the future, is a key point. So really, I think probably all three of our guests have been told by a customer at one time or another that their price is higher than Vietnamese cashews, and they've been asked to mark their prices down. The answer to that is not to mark the price down, it's to highlight the competitive advantages. Very interesting contributions. Thank you to all three. Let's see if there are any questions. So let's go over to Isaac and see if there are any questions for our guests. Isaac.
Yes, Jim, thank you for the presentation, and thanks to our guests for very insightful contributions to today's discussion. We have a few comments and I think one question. We take them, you share your views on them when necessary. The first comment says Tanzania and Guinea-Bissau, higher RCN quality, higher price, chased by Indian RCN importers. Processors compete with Indians at procurement level and with Vietnamese and Ivorian processors at kernel export market level. They are so squeezed. What do you say about this?
Let's put that to James. James, do you feel squeezed?
Indeed. Yes, our biggest competition, Indian cashew industry, is a closed market. You pay a higher price for Indian kernels than anywhere else in the world, and as a result, and also it is good quality and it's premium market, and the Indian buyers of RCN can then afford to pay a higher price for cashews that we would like to buy, RCN that we would like to buy. So yeah, definitely we get squeezed. That's our biggest challenge, is not even the Vietnamese as much as the Indian market, because they're looking for premium cashews and can pay a premium price. So that's definitely, and in West Africa, they have created policies of delaying or having a good period for processors to buy cashews, and that would need to improve in Tanzania in order for us to protect the cashew processing. So yeah, feel squeezed for sure.
Interesting. Daniel, let's come to you. I'll come to Philippe on another question, but Daniel, do you feel squeezed by this competition from RCN export? How does that work in Nigeria?
Yeah, I think the situation is actually worse in Nigeria because until now we don't have a policy like other African countries have. And so right at the beginning of the season, because India offers better price for kernel than anywhere in the world, we cannot compete in buying the RCN with them. So, but recently we held, I think last month we had a meeting and we did a validation of our policy. And with that validation, we'll have to calculate some difference and put in some export tax for RCN. Otherwise, no Nigerian factory is able to compete right now.
So there will be changes in policy in Nigeria, you feel?
Most likely, because I'm the national president for the cashew processors, and we had a meeting. Actually, we expected you to that meeting, but unfortunately, we didn't see you. Mr. Shakti was there, and we spent 2 days deliberating with the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Ministry of Agriculture. The ministers were there, and we brought up a policy, which I think we expect it to be implemented by this season. So that will give us some relief. Otherwise, it has been really tough.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see which how the roadmap goes. I didn't attend that. I was actually, I believe, in Cambodia that week, but such is life.
Yeah.
Interesting though that the situation in Nigeria is even more difficult from what you're saying than in Tanzania. So
Sure.
an export tax would be some form of protection. Do you see, or do you expect any other policy changes to support processing in Nigeria?
Yeah, so that Already there is a government policy, though not implemented, that every commodity must add at least 30% value before export. So
Okay.
in the policy we proposed, we will calculate the difference in the advantage they have, other countries have over Nigeria in processing. That advantage will form the import tax, export tax, I mean, for RCN. Then, like other countries also, the first 1 or 2 months, there'll be ban on RCN export until the local processors are able to buy. So these, and then the funds realized from the export will be used to support the producers and maybe processors. This
Okay.
is likely going to happen.
It's interesting. So it would mean something of a harmonization of policy with other West African countries. Of course, as we know, always the challenges in the implementation, isn't it? I mean, this is the big challenge for governments and regulators.
Yeah.
All right, let's go back to Isaac and see if we have. I think there's a question there about smallholders. Isaac, what have we got?
Yes, a bright future for smallholders through African processors. Local processors cannot always pay the price that RCN exporters are offering, especially in origins where they compete with Indian RCN importers. Example, Togo, Tanzania, Senegal, Guinea-Bissau.
Okay, that's a valid remark. Let's come to Philippe. I mean, how does Cashew Coast manage this? How does Cashew Coast manage to pay farmers an attractive price that keeps them with you? You spoke about traceability, African identity, and the supply chain has been important. How does Cashew Coast manage that? And what part does the marketing and sales play in that?
Yeah. You see, Jim, with our farmers, we are working as the same teams, and we are trying to build a long-term relations with them. So that's why we are buying the government price. So we don't buy under the government price. So we keep the government price, even if the market is low, or yeah, we try to keep the government price with them and to avoid buying raw cashew nuts at lower price. So this is something we do with our farmers. For example, 2 3 years ago, we bought the product at the government price, even if the market was unstable, lower the prices that we heard from some of the traders. So yeah, well, so this is what we are trying to do, and we are trying to build a very good relation. We don't work with them uh, what do you say, just a sport buying. No, we are working like a team. So working like a team means be with them, buying the whole cash nuts at minimum, not under, and try to help them promote other products. We know very well that the farmers don't produce only cashew, uh, curcuma, and for example. So we try to buy this and take, uh, so this is what we are trying to do with them. So it's very that all moments. So we are working directly with them. We work with more than 17,000 farmers at the moment.
Wow.
So we have a very good relation with them, and we know all of them. We know exactly all of them, and we have all information about all of our farmers in our SAP system. And if you came in the factory, you can check. You can check in our bags at which price you can compare at the not for our clients, so they can see if cashew course is doing correctly, or if course is doing what they said. So it's very transparency between us and our farmers and us and our clients.
Okay, I presume that makes the selling job a little bit more straightforward, a little bit easier because you can talk about genuine traceability.
Exactly.
And customers see the advantage of having that connection with the farmers, do they?
Yes, and they are also open to invest on our supply chains, on our supply chain. So we have many sustainability projects with most of our farmers. So they are with. It's not bad on us, and they are ready to better supply chains.
Okay. It's I think it's a unique approach that Cashew Coast has. I'd love to talk to our other speakers on that subject, but just keeping an eye on the time, let's continue. Let's go back to Isaac and see what other questions are there. Isaac.
I think you are on mute.
Oh, very sorry about that. A question on how African processors, to what extent they can compete with Vietnamese processors, considering that even they are able to export very large volumes to the European Union, even without providing any traceability so far.
Okay. How are you going to compete with Vietnam? Daniel, what do you think?
Well, the issue is what we are working for farmers is not about the price, about income. The Vietnamese buyer comes to buy the cashew, the RCN. We never see him again. The African processor is working with the farmer to increase the production. What we are thinking here in Nigeria with this policy in place is how we can double the yield per hectare within the next 3, 4, 5 years. If the yield per hectare is doubled, and even though we're not able to offer the price the Vietnamese are buying, the farmers' income will increase. Not only that, whatever incentive we are getting as taxes, we're plowing this back to the farmers. So the farmer is not actually losing. In terms of competition, he's doing better. So in the short run, the farmer may not see or understand what the policy is all about. But after 2, 3 years, the farmer will discover that he is no longer where he used to be. His yield has gone up, his income has gone up, and his general lifestyle has gone up. So this is the focus, not
Okay,
the
that's
short-term
interesting.
price.
So in the longer run, competition is not just about the baseline price from your perspective. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Correct.
James, what about from your point of view? I mean, are you competing with Vietnamese processors? If you are, how are you going to compete with them? Or is that something, you've outlined a quality premium approach. Is Vietnam a factor?
Yeah, well, Vietnam's always a factor. It just depends. And when you talk about African nuts, there's West African, East African, and then within West Africa, there's different levels of quality, and in East Africa, the same. So just talking about Tanzania and talking about coastal nuts, we have our our reason for coming to Tanzania to processing was because of the quality of cashews. Because yes, you'll always be competing with Vietnam, always, and they'll always be the price makers. They'll be the base price. They're the volume. They're everything in that in relation to the amount that they export 92% to China, 70 plus and 80 plus to America and EU. Of course, they're the dominant factor. So we're saying we have quality, and we're trying to find customers that appreciate quality and have customers that appreciate quality around the world. Some of that's in the Middle East, some of that's in the US, some of that's in Europe. So we're trying to market what we have versus saying what, and our way of competing with Vietnam is that we have better quality. We have fresher quality. We have single origin. We have certification and that the market wants. We have the ability to connect direct with the market. And as Daniel said, we're here, we're continuing to be here. So we're not just coming in once, buying and leaving. So we have relationships with the supply chain. So we have our strongest selling point to compete is quality in Tanzania, because we have quality cashews. And then after that, you have all of the different things you require, which is the certification, which is the communication, which is the reliability and the transparency of and the connection with the farmers. But our individual thing is we have nice quality. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive because we're competing with the Indians for the raw cashew buying, but we have the quality. And if you have the market for it, we try to create that relationship with the customer then to make sure that the entire supply chain is good with quality. So that's
Thank
how
you.
we do it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, we're seeing, if you listen to James, we're talking about a premium quality approach, investment destination chosen based on that long-term approach. When you listen to Philippe, you're hearing an approach based on a full supply chain certification, creating value, creating premiums in that way, direct linkages to farmers. When you listen to Daniel, you hear similar ideas on farmers, strong marketing principles, scale, and competitiveness. So we get approaches, three different approaches that all have something in common, are all identifiably African, but approach the task of marketing, the task of selling according to their conditions in their local market and in their local supply chains. I think we might have time for maybe one more question. Isaac, what else have we got? I see there's lots of questions rolling in now. Isaac, pick one there from the list, please.
Yes, a number of questions, but let me take this. Can raw cashew buyers establish a more competitive price system with the Nigerian farmer? And another one question, how does farmer prices affect African processors who were in the price setting process? So two questions on prices.
Well, let's ask Daniel about the Nigerian question. Can raw cashew buyers establish a more competitive price system with the Nigerian farmers? Daniel, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so in the policy that we've just validated, the price is not going to be set by processors. The price is not going to be set by the farmers. The price is going to be set by a committee, and the committee is made of farmers, it's made of processors, exporters, and it will be bringing one or two people from the international community, like consultants, who have a global knowledge of the prices and the happenings of every season. So it's not going to be an isolated price picked at the detriment of the farmer. It is going to be a price fixed in comparison with Cambodia, with Vietnam, with Burkina Faso, with every other country. So it's not going to be a price that is going to be detrimental to the farmers at all. It's going to be a competitive price, but like I said, the taxes are going to be there also to complement whatever the farmer feels he will have been given additional, especially by the Indian processor.
Okay, but that's all still to be put in place. And that's going to be really interesting to see that evolves. I'm going to come to James Mulhall in a moment because in Tanzania they work within a price setting mechanism that includes the auction. But before I do that, I'd just like to ask Philippe Crew, you work in a country where there is a minimum price. Um, how does that price setting process impact your business? I mean, do you find it's easy to work with it? Do you find that prices are sometimes too high? How does the price setting process of the CCIK impact cashew cost? Philippe.
Yeah, good question. Uh, uh, it's not easier to keep uh, to keep this price to be at the minimum prices because of many aspects like quality, also pricing volatility, uh, and yeah, so it's not something easier for us, but you see, of course, the prices impact a lot our margin, but what we are trying to do is we are trying to show to the farmers that even if we are buying at the minimum prices, but they should do some effort on the quality of the product. They should try more the product and remove also the foreign badges as necessary in the raw cashew nut because this one impact us a lot. So this is a culture that we do with the farmers, and of course we support this price and try to see what we can do to to maintain our profitability.
So work with the system. You have to comply with the law and try to build a marketing campaign that allows you to make a profit based on those raw material prices. It of course makes sense. James, what about this, life with the auction? I know there are some changes to that now. How do you manage this issue of farm gate prices versus Carnell's market?
Um, Well, the system in Tanzania is very structured. It's really set up for a trading market and for an auction system. So farmers bring their product to the co-ops, and the co-ops then bring the product to the auction houses, and they're sold for export. So that is the way the system is set up. So not really set up for processors. So some changes have happened. So as processors can go to co-ops and buy from co-ops, but that system so far is not very straightforward, and it's quite difficult to get access to raw cashew nuts in Tanzania. It's improving, and all of these things take time, as you said about building up capacity and to build a factory, and for us as Coastal Nuts to be able to then get up to capacity takes a number of years. So we're still not at full capacity, and for the local systems that are in place to understand how processing works is also takes some time. So we're in a process, like we can't be guaranteed that the access to co-ops is there next year. Each year the guidelines come up and it's only on a yearly basis. So it's quite difficult for us to say, okay, we get capacity, we build another factory. How do we do that? Because we're not sure that we will get access to raw cashew nuts from the co-ops the following year. And if you have to go through auction, then it's set up for trading, and it's way more expensive. So it's yes, this year the guidelines come out every year, and there's one coming out on the 8th of August, and that will say what is going to happen. And if primary market the going to co-ops is there, then that's fine. If it's not, then so it's just without some sort of long-term thinking around processors and the access to RCN, it makes buying the raw cashew nuts quite difficult in Tanzania.
Interesting. I've long hoped that there would be changes in the regulation to make it easier for Tanzanian cashew processors to buy from farmers, and I hope we see that in the future. Well,
Hopefully.
thanks everyone. Particularly James Mulhall of Coastal Nuts, Philip Crew of Cashew Coast, and Daniel Gamana of Vertex Agro. Thank you so much. What we're seeing, I'd just like to say from our three guests, is really good communication skills, very clear ideas on sales and marketing of African cashew kernels, and three different strategies. And that says a lot. There's a lot to be learned listening to people like these, and thank you very much indeed to the three of you for your really excellent contributions. I can't tell you how much it is appreciated. We've gone way over our time. For once, it's not me to blame for talking too much, but I see that most people have stayed with us, and I thank them for that. We'll be back in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, we'll be talking about policy, production, and processing, and the lessons from the 2026 season. And I've been furiously making notes from our guests today to help me manage some of the issues around there, and there's a lot to be learned. But for now, thanks to everyone for attending. Particular thanks to our guests for their Philippe mentioned professionalism. I'd like to thank the three of them for their very professional presentations and discussion today. And thank you very much to all the participants for joining us, whether you're on Facebook or you're on YouTube or you've joined us on the Zoom call. It's really appreciated, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me pass you back to Isaac.
And then thank you to you, Jim, for the presentation and for leading us in this discussion. We appreciate your continuous efforts towards developing a better and stronger African cashew industry. Before we go, I'd like to remind our participants that online registration for the 2026 ACA Annual Cashew Conference and Expo in Accra, Ghana, September is open. Register now and enjoy up to about 40% discount on all conference rates. We also want to say thank you to our partners, the European Union, the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, GIZ Movecom Cashew, the Cashew Club, and the Sustainable Nuts Initiative. Until we meet on the 19th of August 2026, thank you very much, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.